Hi there everyone, so today I decided to give a short introduction to Akkadian. For those of you who are less familiar with ancient Near Eastern languages and the cuneiform script, so that you can have a little bit of a better insight into how cuneiform developed, how it functions as a script, and its position in the Semitic language family. So the first thing to note about Akkadian is its position linguistically within the Semitic family tree. It is split into two branches, to the east and the west. So on the western branch we have Central and South Semitic. So South Semitic are for languages like the Southern Arabian languages and the Ethiopian languages, whilst Central Semitic has your Levantine languages like Hebrew and Ugaritic, Phoenician, and also the North Arabian languages. The eastern branch is far more condensed because it has only Akkadian. Akkadian is the only contender on the eastern branch of the Semitic family tree. There is one other possible contender, which is Eblaite, but that's an undeciphered language, so we can't be sure about that one. So Akkadian first developed in the 3rd millennium BC. The earliest attestations are from around 2600 BC, and we refer to these texts as Old Akkadian. From around 2000 BC, Akkadian splits into two dialects. In the north, we see Assyrian, and in the south, the dialect is Babylonian. So both of these dialects are referred to collectively as Akkadian, but there are some slight nuances in terms of the signs which are used. The lexicon is slightly different, the grammar, the syntax. So when we're working through a text, I'll point out whether it's written in Assyrian or in Babylonian, so you can start to get used to what some of the nuances are between them. So that's everything to note about Akkadian in terms of its linguistic position. For those of you who are wondering how cuneiform functions as a script, contrary to popular belief, it's not a pictographic language. Cuneiform is a logosyllabic language, which means it combines logographic and syllabic elements. So I'll show you what that means now. When you see any sign in Akkadian, it could belong to one of three categories. It could be a phonogram, which are your sound signs. It could be a logogram, which are your word signs, or it could be a determinative. Determinatives are a category of signs which are there to denote to you that what follows belongs to a certain category of words. So if we look at each of those categories with a little bit more insight, so phonograms are your sound signs. This is the first category. An example of a typical phonogram would be this one here. So this is a sound sign which just represents the syllabic value na. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself, it is just there to act as an element of a single phonetic element of a word or phrase. Another very common sound sign is this one here. This represents the sound value a, just a single open vowel. One thing to note about phonograms is that each sign can have more than one potential phonetic value. So for example, this sign here, which you will see a lot, has two potential syllabic values. It could be eel or al. And it's up to you to decide as a translator in context which translation makes the most sense. So that's your first category. The second category are the logograms. You might hear these being referred to as sumerograms or ideograms, but they are all referring to the same thing. We call them sumerograms sometimes because the Assyrians and Babylonians inherited the cuneiform script from the Sumerians. So sometimes Sumerian signs are used as archaic retentions, so that the scribes can show that they are very well educated and are holding the their Sumerian heritage in reverence, essentially. So an example of a logogram would be something like this. This is the logogram for the word house. In Sumerian, the word house is written like this, with an F, and the Akkadian counterpart is beaten. The Akkadian word for house is beaten. When you're learning your logograms, you will have to learn the sound, the sign, the Sumerian word, and the Akkadian word as well. So you have to learn all three elements. Another example of a logogram would be this sign here. This one we have already met previously as a phonogram, but in this instance it's working as a logogram. And it means it is denoting the word for God. In Sumerian this word is dingir, and in Akkadian the word is elam. You'll notice that our phonograms were all transliterated in lowercase, whereas the logograms are being written in uppercase. This is just normal Assyriological convention. Logograms can also be representing grammatical elements, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a word. This sign here is a plural marker. So it just means that if you see the sign, whatever preceded it is a noun in the plural. And the sound value which accompanies this sign is mesh, all in uppercase. So that's everything to note about logograms, which brings us to our last category of determinatives. Unlike the previous two categories, the determinatives are not seeking to add any syllabic element or to insert entire words into a phrase. Determinatives are just there to show you that whatever follows belongs to a particular category. So, for example, this is quite a common determinative. And this is its phonetic complement, gish. If you see this sign, it is trying to tell you that whichever word follows is belonging to the category of wood. So it could be that it is an object made of wood, like a boat, or it could be a proper noun, a proper name for a type of wood. So it's just there to show you, to give you a hint in advance that whatever follows belongs to that particular category of words. Another quite common determinative is this sign here, which we're meeting for the third time. And if you see this sign as a determinative, it means that whatever follows is the personal name of a god. You'll notice as well with determinatives that they're all written in superscript, so just above the normal written line. The takeaway from this is that signs can not only have one potential phonetic value, they can also work across categories. So this sign we've seen working as a phonogram, as a logogram, and as a determinative. And you have to be discerning in your translation and decide which is the sign, which is the translation, which is making the most sense in the context. It's the nature of Akkadian languages that makes it more fun, I think. So, those are all three categories. There are a lot of other things to note about sign conventions, but we're just covering the basics here, so we can leave it at that for now, and you're familiarised with all three categories. So now we move on to the process of translation, which can similarly be subdivided into three separate steps. The first of which is transliteration, followed by transcription or normalisation, and then translation. So we'll go through each of those steps together. Don't be disheartened, those of you who do not know very many signs yet, or if you're not too familiar with the vocabulary. that kind of thing can be filled in later. This is just to give you a general overview of what the process of translation looks like from cuneiform into English, step by step. So, the first step is transliteration. This is the process whereby we go through a tablet, sign by sign, and decide which are the correct sound values or logographic values for each of the individual signs. You'll also notice cuneiform is written from left to right, and there are no spaces between the signs. So the word boundaries have to be decided by the translator, and this will become more simple and intuitive the more you become familiar with the language. However, it can be a little bit overwhelming at the beginning, especially when each sign has more than one potential value. It's difficult to decide right off the bat which is the correct one, so I have a habit of noting down every known value of a sign underneath each of the cuneiform signs, and then coming back to the transliteration at the end and deciding which one of the translations is the most likely in the context. So that's what we're going to do here. So this is a very simple phrase in Assyrian. It comes from an Assyrian letter to the god Ashur. And we will start from the far left. So this sign here is a sign we met at the beginning. It's a phonogram, denoting the sound value A. We join our phonograms in transliteration with a hyphen. So I'll start the word boundaries for us here. So this is the first sign value, representing the syllable A, followed by this sign, which we also met previously, with the sound value Na. And then we come to the third sign. This one we have met previously, and it had multiple possible values. So it could be working as the determinative for the word God, written in superscript. It could be the logogram, Dingir, for the word God. Or it could be working as a phonogram representing either Eel or L. So we've got all of those possibilities written there, and then we can come back later and omit the ones that we think are not very likely. The fourth sign here again, we have the value A, and this is a new sign. It is also a phonogram, and it represents the sound value Shur. Going on to the second line, we have A. This is a new sound value Hu, that is also a phonogram. And then we have the same sign here, so we're just going to note down all of the possible translations. We notice that the logograms are all going in uppercase, the phonograms are going in lowercase, and the determinatives are in superscript. And this is the final sign. This is a logogram we met earlier, with the which is transliterated as mesh. So that is the process of transliteration. For those of you who are more familiar with Assyrian and Babylonian history, you might recognise this word here as belonging to a personal name of a god, Ashur, or it could be the city-state of Assur as well, named after the same god. So having deduced that this is the name of a god, we can see that the most likely translation of the sign which precedes it is the determinative, which would indicate that what was following was going to be the name of a god. So we can omit the other three possibilities here. So that first line of transliteration is complete. And then similarly down here, we have this logogram at the end, mesh, which indicates that whatever precedes it is a noun in the plural. So the only option of these three possibilities is the logogram, because this is the only one which is representing a whole word by itself. So we can omit the determinative and the phonograms, and notice that the two logograms at the bottom here have been separated by a full stop in transliteration, whereas all of our phonograms have been divided by a hyphen. That's the normal Assyriological convention for transliteration. So that is our first step complete. We have all of the correct syllabic and logographic values mapped out underneath the cuneiform text. The second step is normalisation, or sometimes you will hear it being called transcription. and both are the same thing. So normalisation is the process whereby we are omitting the hyphens and the full stops between each of the signs, and we are condensing them into whole Babylonian or Assyrian words. In this case it's Assyrian. This means that sometimes there will be sound changes which take place, which will be covered in a different lesson because that's a whole different kettle of fish. And also, as part of the process of normalisation, we translate any logograms back into Akkadian. That's why when you're learning your logograms at the beginning, you have to learn both the Sumerian word for the transliteration and the Akkadian word for the normalisation. Both are necessary. So we'll start here with our first word. These two syllables, ana, represent the word ana, and it's a preposition meaning to, for, towards in Akkadian. Normalising these three signs here, there are no sign changes which take place in this instance, so it's very simple. We're just removing the hyphen to get Dingir Asher. The same goes for this one here. There are no sound changes which take place. It's nice and easy. And these two signs here represent a noun abu, which is the Akkadian word for father. These last two signs here are the difficult one. So if you remember, the logogram Dingir is the Sumerian word for God, and the Babylonian and the Akkadian translation of that word is Elam. However, that is a noun that's in the singular, and we know that this one needs to be in the plural. So the plural word for gods in Akkadian is Ilani. So that is our normalisation process completed. And the third step is translation. So roughly this sentence will read, for Asher, father of the gods. And last but not least, I thought I would leave you with some recommendations for written resources and online resources which you can access for free to help you continue to study Akkadian in your spare time. So first things first, with regards to grammars, there are a couple of cult grammars like Huehnergard's A Grammar of Akkadian and Caplice's An Introduction to Akkadian. These are excellent written resources. I would absolutely recommend them. However, they are quite academically dense, so for those of you who aren't so familiar with the process of language learning, or perhaps you've never learnt an ancient language before, I would recommend that you start with a simpler grammar, something like Worthington's A Complete Guide to Babylonian, and that's simply because it is divided into smaller segments, which makes the process of learning a little bit more manageable, and it's written more plainly if you're not familiar with more subject-specific terminology. Secondly, in terms of dictionaries, it's not strictly necessary to go and buy your own dictionary. We have an online resource called the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, and this has absolutely everything that you're going to need in terms of translating texts for your studies. If you do decide that you want a written dictionary, the one that I would recommend for beginners is Jeremy Black and Andrew George's A Concise Dictionary of Akkadian. And thirdly, when it comes to memorising your signs, I always recommend that you keep your own sign list. This is definitely the best way of doing it for a beginner. Just find an empty notepad, noting down the new signs which you're acquiring on the left-hand side and any known phonetic or syllabic or logographic elements on the right-hand side. And the benefit of doing it this way, in my opinion, is that you can add to your sign list as you go along. You can add new phonetic values or logographic values which potentially you didn't initially know. But also, if you're using mnemonic aids to memorise your signs, which I suggest that you do, you can write down your mnemonic aid on the right-hand side. And this way, if you have a large gap of time between lessons or between the time that you have available to learn Akkadian, then you can refer back to the same mnemonic. And this is going to help you retain the sign for far longer. So I would definitely recommend doing it that way. There are online resources which you can use to memorise your signs. Language learning platforms like Memrise can assist you in doing that. they use online flashcard systems, which are really helpful just for quick and easy learning. And finally, online resources. There are quite a few, but most notably, the ones which are going to help you the most, I think, are things like Seal. This is Sources of Early Akkadian Literature, and it is an online catalogue of 2nd and 3rd millennium BC cuneiform texts. So they will be able to provide you with images of cuneiform tablets, line art drawings, along with transliterations and translations. So you can have a go yourself at transliterating and translating the tablet, and then you can check your work against the work of professional Assyriologists to see how you fared. This is a really excellent way of acquiring new vocabulary, learning about grammar and learning about the different functions of signs, so I would definitely recommend taking a look at that. And CDLI, this is the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative. It's going to help you in many of the same ways that SEAL will. It is an online catalogue and image database of the cuneiform corpus, so they will also be able to provide you with cuneiform tablets, transliterations, translations. But what makes them particularly interesting is that they are working with the open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus. And what this program is aiming to do is they take texts from CDLI and they've organised them into projects which aim to give special insight into particular areas of Mesopotamian culture and history. So if there's a particular area of the culture or history which you're interested in, you can take a look at the site and then read texts which are specifically referring to those elements. So that is everything for today, guys. I hope that you found that introductory lesson useful. Let me know which elements of Akkadian you would like to cover next, and I will see you next time.